Good afternoon, students, faculty, staff, friends of UATX. My name is Maggie Kelly. I'm a staff member here, and it is my great honor today to welcome today's guest, a writer, comedian, and commentator known for her fearless takes, unfiltered honesty, and humor that cuts through the noise. Of all the distinguished guests we have hosted, she is undoubtedly the funniest. Bridget Phetasy swears no allegiance to any side in the culture wars. She slays all sacred cows. She's the creator of Dumpster Fire, a weekly satire show that gleefully roasts the absurdities of modern life, and the host of Walk-Ins Welcome, a star-studded podcast that examines both individual transformation and our common cultural contradictions. As a regular at Comedy Mothership, a repeat guest on the Joe Rogan Experience, a contributing editor at The Spectator, and a writer at Tablet, Quillette, and The Atlantic, among others, Bridget helps us comprehend sobriety, serenity, integrity, femininity, and of course, freedom. She is, in her own words, something of a cautionary tale, a living testament to both sanity and redemption. Please join me in welcoming Bridget Phetasy.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That made me sound so impressive. Thank you for that introduction. I am definitely maybe the funniest, not the smartest. You guys, I've been to some of the events you've had, Peter Thiel, so many brilliant, Ayan Hirsi Ali, so many brilliant people who I look up to in the culture wars, and I knew nothing about the culture wars. I want to thank everybody for having me here. This is really an honor. You guys are partaking in an experiment. And for that, the students, you're very brave already. You're way ahead of the game, truly, in terms of being able to try something new and take a risk and really not know where the path is unfolding. This is something that I came here to talk about today. So if you had told me to write a letter to my future self in high school, as they often do, and say, you know, what do you think that will be your future? There's no way I would have said I will be sitting in a rehab at the age of 19. Don't worry. But it's okay. It's part of my story. I never would have guessed. I probably should have guessed at a certain point, but I was one of those kind of star students. I am the oldest of five. I was a straight A student. I had my set sight on an Ivy League. I wanted to go to Harvard more than anything, or maybe Georgia, somewhere very fancy. And there were things that were out of my control in my life and things that happened that changed the trajectory of a lot of that. One, I've written about very openly. My parents got divorced. It was not pretty. And then we were kind of feral children. I'm Gen X. We were on our own. We raised ourselves. There was not much supervision. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Dan. It is a thing. I mean, it's quite funny to think about how feral Gen X really was compared to the generations that came after. A lot of that, I look back, I moved a lot growing up before my parents even got divorced. So I was thinking about this yesterday, even in respect to my weird role in the culture war, which is, again, something I never would have even foreseen for myself. I was always the outsider looking in. I was always the new girl, to the point that I think I had a bit of a new girl complex. Everywhere I went, I felt like people were talking about me. They often were in junior high. I was the new kid surrounded by cliques, and I was able to kind of really observe human nature and what we would call now in the culture wars tribalism at its very root-based form, middle school, and as you all know, and high school as well. So I think that really, I've been thinking and writing a lot about this lately as I try and make sense of the last decade of my life. So I moved to Los Angeles right after I got out of rehab. Not something I recommend to anyone, very young. And I decided to drop out of college. I was in college, and it wasn't the school I wanted to go to, and I was paying for most of it. And I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be a writer, and that pursuing any career in the arts was going to be dodgy, to say the least. And if I wanted to pursue it, I would not be able to pursue it and get out of college with the amount of debt that I was racking up. And I, mind you, was the oldest of 5. My parents were very old school, even though they were divorced. They both had the rule that we'll help you if you're in college. If you drop out of college, you're on your own. So at 20 years old, I moved to Los Angeles, and I decided I wanted to be a writer. Well, I moved out there to be an actress, actually, which was like, you guys would probably think of it as an influencer now, but actresses were a thing once. And I moved there to do that, and then realized that I could be a writer. I didn't even know you could get paid to do this. This was something, being an artist wasn't something that was really, it was something that was not attainable in the way that people who grew up in Los Angeles had parents in the industry. This was a path that was very obvious for them. For me, it was like go into marketing. I was trying to get a degree, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I was getting a degree in communications when I dropped out. So moved to Los Angeles, and that was when I realized I could be a writer, and then I just started taking odd jobs, and I was on my own. I worked at a bike shop. I mean, you guys can ask me the number of odd jobs that I took. I've worked everywhere from a bike shop in the Valley to waiting tables for many, many decades to working on farms in Northern California. Make that of it what you will. As some of you know. And then I ended up, I jumped into the flow of life. There's a great, I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. It's the You Can't Connect the Dots Looking Forwards. It's kind of a famous talk that Steve Jobs gave, and he talks. It was basically he's talking about how he never could have seen how taking calligraphy would have helped him to do the design for Apple and all of these things. And that I watched that really right at the right moment in my life, as well as finding this very important quote that I internalized at that time, which is the work will teach you how to do it. I didn't know how to do anything. I knew how to write, and that was it. And when I dropped out of college and wanted to be a writer, I was like, well, I did learn how to do this in kindergarten. Now, granted, reading is very important to becoming a writer, but I figured I grew up with Good Will Hunting. I was like, I'll just go to the library. So I ended up just jumping into the flow, and one thing led to another, and I was lost for a very long time. I think I lost myself, found myself, and didn't have a clear direction, but I did always have a vision for starting my company, which I wanted to do, and I always wanted to write, and I just kept following that, and it led me to being an intern at this very infamous website, Buddyhead, in Los Angeles, where I took pictures of punk rock bands and transcribed completely incoherent interviews that were done in these grunge bars. I did my first real writer's job was a love and advice column that I did for Buddyhead. I was the Buddyhead girl. And then I moved back east and got stuck in waiting tables, again, another rut. And I ended up getting married very young to a man from Belarus. And he was a busser. And we ended up getting married very young. And we were stuck in this restaurant industry rut. And then hit another kind of bottom again. But all through this, I was writing, always writing. When I went into rehab, I started writing, and I just never stopped. And I started writing a column. I applied for a job for a column for my local newspaper, and then I started doing a weekly column. And that was my first real, I got paid $50 for this column. And thank you. You look very excited for me. I was so excited. And I caused so much trouble with this column because it was a very small town, and I was writing. My dad begged me to stop doing it because he was like, please, why are you doing this? I would write about all kinds of things. There was a whale washed up on the beach, and I wrote this column, something stinks around here, and why weren't they getting rid of this whale? Kids were playing on it. It seemed very dangerous. So I was just asking questions pretty early on. Not those kinds of questions. And So I kept doing that, and then I ended up, like all women in the 2000s who were lost, found yoga and became a yoga instructor. And I was recently on a podcast actually with Lauren Compton. She has this First Date podcast, and she said, "Oh, you were a yoga instructor. All women who have trauma in their background become yoga instructors who are around my age," and it's actually pretty true. She tracked that right away. And then I ended up moving back to Los Angeles. I was waiting tables again. I continued to write. Somebody dared me to do stand-up comedy in 2010. I got on stage and realized that this part of my brain that was always talking actually had a voice, and it made sense to me right away. I'm a weird person in that I never really wanted to be a comic. I'm actually quite resistant to the lifestyle and all of the industry, and I just love being on stage. Something in my brain got quiet in the way that only heroin quieted my brain. I'm sorry. As I was saying, I was like, I'm at a college. I should be respectable, but here we are. It did silence, and in the same way that kind of meditation silenced my mind too. I got to there's a part. I think it's the writer in me. There's just a narrator that's always yapping constantly in every situation that I find myself in. Even some of the worst situations in my life, there's been some narrator making fun of all of it and the kind of absurdity of it. So I started doing stand-up comedy. I was waiting tables. I was writing scripts. I have television show ideas. I wrote movies, the normal Los Angeles thing. I was still drinking and partying. It wasn't, I always tried to control it, but really couldn't. Getting sober is a big part of my story. 2013, I traveled the world for 2 years. I don't want to bore you all. And then, I mean, it's not boring, but it's a whole other hour of material. So I traveled the world, I came back, and then I kind of hit another rock bottom. This one wasn't, my first rock bottom was very physical. I lost my health. I lost my job. I was in school at the time, and I think part of me being the oldest and not being able to articulate that I didn't really want to go to college. Part of it was me trying to find a way out of college. I don't recommend that being the path. You guys picked a better alternative, an alternative school that's cool and lets you be curious and open-minded. And I ended up hitting another rock bottom. This one was more internal. Even though my life looked on the outside like it was okay, I just hit another kind of, for lack of a better word, spiritual rock bottom. I got sober again, this time for good. And I've been sober since 2013. And please don't clap or anything because, as I say on stage, it makes me want to use heroin again. It's the hardest thing I've ever done and the best thing I've ever done. And then in 2015, life started changing. I started seeing material success, if you will. So I started writing. I was always writing through all of this. And I wrote my first column actually almost exactly 10 years ago to April Fool's Day was the first time I got published by Playboy. And I wrote a column for them and begged them to do a weekly column, which they then allowed me to do. So starting in 2016, I did a weekly column, which was a grind, and I knew nothing. It was truly this Estonian proverb that I internalized way back when, the work will teach you how to do it. I just was writing, and I had a brilliant editor. He knew I was green, and he taught me the ropes for journalism. And I would be like, why do I have to be a journalist? I'm a columnist. This is just my opinion. And he's like, all great columnists are journalists at their heart. And he was such a brilliant editor. I was so spoiled by him. And then one thing led to another, and I knew nothing about the culture wars either. I wasn't online. I had been waiting tables. I'm a kind of a normie supremacist in this way. I really try to stay in touch with the people who are not very online. I actually think the two Americas are the very online and the people who are not online. They say it's right and left, and there is some truth to that, but really more than anything, it's people who live online and are almost 5 years ahead of the culture, and then the normies who are just trying to make ends meet, raise their kids, and not get too drowned in all of that noise. And you can't really do a lot about it anyways. And I knew nothing about the culture wars. So I always joke that it was like someone coming from a blackout from the 90s, merging into 2015 discourse online. And you guys were probably around online. Were you? I'm going to find out. I'm going to ask that question when we start talking. And I got caught in the crossfire because the biggest thing I've learned in all of this is that I owe nothing to anyone except for the art. And the art, I don't need to be any kind of representative of it. I feel like it gets to live in its own plane. I want it to be an artist, and I want to express myself as many ways as possible. That is my job and purpose while I'm here, to just freely express myself. And I found that there was so much noise that I had to overcome internally, so many voices, my parents, society. There's a lot of internal self-censorship going on that I had to overcome. And then the external censorship started happening when I was out in Los Angeles and I was wanting to be in late night rooms, and I started wanting to make jokes at, the expense of maybe another side, and felt like I couldn't. So I started noticing a new voice of self-censorship that I had to overcome. And I did, and it put me on this whole path. And then I started Walk-ins Welcome to talk to very brilliant people, like many of the people you have as guests. And that became almost like a college education, because they all have books and they're all brilliant. And I had to learn about critical theory and all of the things that I would have learned had I gone to college. And then I started Dumpster Fire in my garage to make fun of the nonsense that was going on and the absurdity of everything, because we do live in completely absurd times. And everything kind of took off from there. It just, the path continues to unfold. I have learned everything about content creation the hard way. I've done it. I had a conversation with somebody, a very famous, successful writer yesterday, who is interested in starting a podcast. And I was like, you have resources and you have people like agents and managers, and you can just do this and they'll help you do it. I had to find sponsors, and it's been a real journey. I started writing at Spectator in the magazine. And I will say, for reading, I was reading a lot of my old writing, kind of prepared to talk to you guys. And it makes me emotional. I have a child now and a husband, my second husband. We met in recovery. The most important things in my life. It's a miracle. I had her at 43. They told me I couldn't have kids, and I did have a geriatric pregnancy. And the amount of self-loathing that I had for myself in those years, when I had a vision and knew what I wanted and knew I wanted to bring these things into the world, and was not there yet and didn't know how to get there, it's actually a miracle that I'm here. It is intense levels of self-loathing, because I didn't have the support or belief in myself to know that I could create this thing that I saw and envisioned and allow it to be even something else other than what I thought it would be. This whole idea for my company, Phetasy, was started with greeting cards, and it's taken on a complete other life of its own. And I will still make those greeting cards someday. I will not. I'm also tenacious. I have learned that about myself. I will just not give up on it. And I had one story for you. I had no money. I was too broke to afford shampoo. This was right after the 2008 financial collapse. And I was teaching private yoga, so I was the first thing to go. And I knew it was coming because the money men were freaking out. And I was like, oh, when the money men freak out, that's when the rest of us should be worried, because they usually didn't freak out and they were worried. And I was the first thing to go. And I I also had this idea for a show, and these guys kind of tried to bully me into selling the concept for $10,000. And they were really aggressive about it, and I was defiant, and they told me I was an idiot. And I had also lost my car in a blackout that same week. But because I had done that, you could laugh at that, it was fine. Because I had done that, I was like, I'm too stupid to be making any deals right now, even ones that seem appealing and might be helpful. And I just said no. And I'm glad, because that idea, I can still make it. I can still write it. It's still mine. I'm not sure what's going to happen to IP in the world of AI, but I will say IP is sacred, even if it means nothing in the future. It is your genius coming through you. It is whatever you feel inspired to make and create. It's that path that gives you the juice. I would say follow that. Just follow that instinct. You're here already. And like I said, you're already light years ahead of most people, because most people want to do it safe, and they want to follow the path that has been worn before them. You guys are literally embarking and creating your own path with this new University of Austin. This is incredible and exciting, and you're the first class doing that. You should be so proud of yourselves, because most people want to feel like there's some illusion of safety and there's some illusion of control that they have, even if it's all an illusion and you can get a phone call that will change your life in a minute. And you are taking already a harder path. And I want to just honor all of you for doing that, because it inspires me as someone who has literally learned everything the hard way. I pray that you guys learn lessons in a way that challenges you, because it will make you stronger. I've learned much more from failing than I have from succeeding. Succeeding gives you confidence. Failure teaches you the lessons you need. I failed my first company. I went bankrupt, and I learned more from that bankruptcy and failure for my second time around doing a business than had I succeeded right out of the gates. The confidence is necessary to keep going, or just the delusion. I always say the difference between delusion and dreams is hard work. To a certain extent, you've got to just be a little bit delusional to see something no one else can see and believe in that. But you can't just sit around and wait for it to happen. You've got to get out there and work. And you won't always know the right step. It will, but you just have to do something. At least do something. It will lead you one way or another, or it will open doors that you didn't even know were there to be opened. And your job is to just stay as open and curious. And I've been gifted by so much of that falling in the mud and reemerging. I've been gifted with the ability to know that I can get up again. So the other thing, when we're really afraid of failing, we're really afraid of making mistakes, and you can have that paralysis by analysis, is that you will also undermine your ability to fail and get up again, and know that you can get up again, and know that from that failure, you're going to learn a lesson that you won't have to learn later on in a much harder way, hopefully. I've made a lot of mistakes, but most of them haven't been the same. So I do really want to hear from you guys, though. I'm so grateful to everybody for letting me come speak. I often feel a huge sense of imposter syndrome because I never did get a degree. Maybe I will come here and get a degree with you guys. And so there's always been this kind of sense that I don't belong around the academics, and I don't belong around people who have degrees, and it's not some magical thing. I know, as we've seen, a degree doesn't guarantee that you have a job, and it doesn't guarantee that you're even smart. It guarantees some doors are open, but really what you're learning here is more important than whatever piece of paper you graduate from, which is how to take risks, how to think, how to question and be curious and interrogate your own beliefs. And that will give you more freedom and courage than any piece of paper ever will. And that's all I've got. And we have a mic.
What were you actually writing when you were like in rehab, or was it a story that was ongoing, or was it just your thoughts?
I have journals, and it was like, have you seen the movie Seven? It was like a serial killer journal. It was really, I was observing everything around me. I didn't want to lose any of the most. I knew that I was observing detox, first of all. So first it was really just physically detoxing. I was writing down everything. I was writing down every detail about all of the different rehabs I was in. And then I started drinking at a pretty young age, 12. And there was a lot of stuff I hadn't processed, looked at, thought about, talked about. And so that all started coming up when I was in rehab. It was just a stream of consciousness, like download of not great stuff, but a lot of stuff that probably needed to get out. So it was mostly journals at first, and then it morphed.
Thank you for your talk. Your life has, as you have expressed, you've had a lot of hardship, and even you talking about your child, I very much appreciate your vulnerability to show emotion. And then also as a comedian, I suspect that your life is filled with a lot of laughter. What do you think about these seemingly opposed emotional states of laughter and then crying? How are they maybe similar? What's their relationship as means of catharsis?
Yeah, I think they're deeply intertwined and all part of the human experience. I've laughed so hard I've cried, and I've also cried hysterically to the point that I've started laughing. I don't know that there's a pretty thin line between those two things from in my experience, and I worry that we're very disembodied because we spend so much time online. We're not in our bodies. One of the things I did, which sounds very hippie and woo, but I did a lot of that stuff. I was at this ashram. It was actually more like a cult, but it was an ashram. I thought it was an ashram. It was a sex cult. It was in Australia, and there was this one. It was like an activation breath work thing that they did, and it was wild what would come up. There is a lot of stuff that you store in your body, and we sit in front of these screens and feel all of these emotions now: outrage, we were bombarded with all of these horrific images, also memes, which are hilarious, and I think the antibodies of the entire media blob, which is another discussion entirely. And one of the most upsetting things during that weird time, 2016, 2017, 2018, that I started observing was people were suppressing their laughter because they weren't sure if they could laugh at certain jokes about certain things because everything was so sensitive, and people were worried in Los Angeles in particular about being perceived as, a Nazi or whatever they were afraid of. And people were suppressing laughter, which is almost, you can't fake a laugh. It's so natural. So to watch people kind of suppressing that was one of the moments that I realized that I really have to just follow my instinct wherever it leads me, even if it takes me away from audiences and I lose followers or I lose status or jobs, because I would rather that than have to suppress my laughter. And the same with tears. I think tears are very cathartic, and we need to be able to allow, in the same way that I think we have to allow questions to come freely through, we do ourselves a disservice not allowing those emotions to flow freely through as well. I don't know if that answers the question.
In light of that, will funny movies ever make a comeback?
A great question. One for my manager. Just kidding. I just outed my manager. I'm not sure. The short answer to that question is funny is subjective. So I'm not exactly sure what happened to movies in general. It seems like since 2011, 2012, there's been a weird, I'm not sure, it does feel like AI is writing everything. There's that weird kind of slop feel to everything that you see on television these days. And I'm not sure if that's just because it's the world we live in now and that's it. Yeah, and I think this is why comedians have these guys who are kind of canceled. They're Elon was saying like, oh, let's make funny legal again. I'm like, all the guys I know who were canceled or were bucking against this socially acceptable form of humor are literally riding private jets. Like they did fine for themselves. So I think that comedy is still out there. It's more in the stand-up world, which is thriving. And because they too followed I feel as a comedian, I'm a mercenary. I make fun of myself. No one gets a pass. That my job as a comedian is to take aim at all things, not just powerful, anything. People have such subjective views of what funny is. I mean, I'll get in front of audiences that are millennials and I can tell that we don't always get each other. And part of it is because they love those comedians that are really in their heads and on SSRIs and like they're super, into their own neuroses, and that's not me. So they have their own favorite comedians, and it's also so much about what is funny at the time. And I think there will be an overcorrection, and some of the stuff that was kind of irreverent is now going to get to be, like that based humor there will be a reaction to that as well. So comedy's always moving, and one of the things I live a pretty good commute away, and I've been listening to Rick Rubin's book on being creative, and he talks a lot about how commercial success really doesn't mean that your art is good or bad. It's just what the culture wants right now. And I think too, some of the like movie studios and departments, one of the tragedies, honestly, and this was an overcorrection, what I worry about is there has been an entire generation of men who have been kind of pushed out of the arts. So it was a very male-dominated industry. Women kind of took over, particularly on the executive level in Hollywood, and became more gatekeepers. And then men in general in institutions and in classrooms, they're not necessarily going to feel comfortable in a creative writing class. There's been a whole generation of male talent that I think has been alienated from the arts, and that is unfortunate. And I hope a lot of those guys decide to pursue a path writing if that's what's in their heart to do, because I worry about that a little bit too. And I think you're seeing that too in the culture, this divide between men and women. Online in particular. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your talk.
Of course.
I just thought it was really interesting when you talked about how you find that there's actually a distinction between people who are like chronically online versus the normies than there necessarily is between left and right. So kind of what are some other things that through your exploration and examination into the culture wars that we don't talk about a lot that are actually really big factors on what's dividing our culture today?
I mean, a lot of lip service is given to these bot farms that are dividing us, and people will acknowledge it and say that this is happening, but we brush over it, and then it's absolutely happening. I will see people going, the bots are affecting our discourse, and then they'll be arguing with bots. I'm like, you have to, it's so hard when you're in that moment and you get heated to take your own advice, but there truly is outside, there are strong cultural forces and countries and money that are investing in encouraging all of us to tear each other apart. And we should pay more attention to that. I also think it is our duty to recognize audience capture is a thing if you're online, no matter what you're doing. There's an algorithm that is training you. My sister said something really funny. She said, if the algorithm's just learning what I like and it's giving me more of that, aren't we all radicalizing ourselves? I was like, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. But you have to be pretty self-aware to recognize that that's happening, and you have to know how to mitigate against those forces. As someone on Twitter, I always said, if you get a lot of followers, and I think there's a lot to the dead internet theory. Have you guys heard of this? Yes. Okay, good. Of course you have. That's why I love you. Those of you who don't know what the dead internet theory is, it's basically that it's all fake and it's not real and it's bots and AI, and you're not even, it's very hard to tell what's real and what's not. I think AI is going to mess things up even more for people. When I was on Twitter before it was really kind of broken like it is now, if I got a lot of followers for saying one thing, I would tweet the opposite of that, just to kind of shake out anyone who thought I maybe had an allegiance to one side or another. And something someone else said to me, when I was early on getting a lot of followers, because the right wing was like, she's ours now. And I was like, no, I'm not. I saw what you guys were saying about me when I was writing for Playboy, so I don't trust you. And there was something my friend said, and I said, why do they all think I'm right wing? And he said, it's not what you're saying, it's what you're not saying. And that is also audience capture. So I was self-censoring in another way without even realizing it. So now my whole instinct is just like, no, like I think it and it's like send tweet, unless I don't feel like a fight. But I try really hard. If there's kind of a pause, I will ask myself, am I pausing because I know this is going to make my audience mad? And if that is the answer, then I should definitely put it out there.
Can you talk about the current overlap or seemingly overlap between comedy and conspiracy theory?
Oh, interesting. There's something. My yoga instructor started a really interesting podcast called Conspirituality. And during the COVID days, 2020, we both started seeing, I saw this happening too, so I'm glad he did a whole podcast on it. What we saw was happening was all of these yogis who were left wing were starting to be immersed in this they were getting red pilled, basically, for lack of a better word. So it was kind of the optimism of the woo hippiness left, mixed with the kind of darkness and the conspiratorial mindedness of the right. And it created essentially what is now the Maha movement. And I think the same thing happened in comedy. You saw comedians who really had no allegiance to anyone. It was jarring during that time being a comedian, because comedians the way I always saw it, the way I understood it, we're in the trenches together. There was not a big divide in comedy. There might have been like alt comedy and some other and mainstream comedy, but there wasn't a real political divide in the way that I noticed occurring. And it was unsettling. And then I think you saw people getting more embraced by this massive audience that was not being spoken to. Nobody was making content for normies, really. And then there's that conspiratorial bent, the same thing that kind of took over those yogis during COVID. Although I think I see it on the left too. I mean, conspiracies everywhere. The problem is our institutions have collapsed, and there is every normie I talk to is either checking out or saying they don't know what to believe anymore. Those are the two most common things I hear from normies. I can't pay attention because it's too much, and I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know what's true. They lost trust in the mainstream media, but they don't necessarily trust in the alternative media. And if they do, they've gone all in on cults of personality. Cults of personality are also huge right now. And in the absence of some kind of system people feel they can trust, they're going to turn to conspiracies because, conspiracies are hilarious. They are funny. They're just funny. And I think the great thing about conspiracies is that you can entertain them. And if you're conspiracy minded, it's hilarious. The problem is the greatest conspiracy in all of humanity ends up blaming the Jews for everything. And if you are a conspiracy minded person and you allow yourself to keep moving in a direction, that direction's often going to lead to the Jewish question. And this is where I think, in this moment in particular, you have to, again, exercise a lot of self-awareness. And there needs to be some more information about how it's so wild, because it's such an ancient, it's like something gets activated in the human DNA with that. It's just such an ancient thing that's in our humanity. And so I do worry that this entertaining conspiracies because they're fun and funny, and why not? And it's, somebody sent me a video the other day, and it was about the moon is a hollowed out spaceship. And it was a guy talking about how, here's his theory about why the moon is a hollowed out spaceship. It's not actually the moon. And he has a small little goldfish with a tinfoil hat. And I was like, I'll listen to it. And 15 seconds in, I was like, yeah, the moon is a hollowed out spaceship. I'm on board. It didn't take long. It's fun, but I think there is absolutely a dark underbelly to conspiracy, and it goes from being fun and funny to dark. And again, these things interplay. This is comedy. Comedy interplays with the sublime and the dark and the dirt and the mud and the good and the bad and dark and light. But it can get, I'm not exactly sure how to mitigate against those forces once they are underway. And part of me thinks it seems like some process humanity somehow has to go through, but I think it feels like everything is engaged. I mean, even normies are taking, it's not just comedians. There are scientists who are conspiracy theorists now. There are plumbers. There are normie moms. I've watched a lot of moms get red pilled, and I get it, because the institutions lost everybody's trust. And then it's like Michael Malice says, take one red pill, not the whole bottle. So you can open up and say, that was the most disorienting thing when I left my tribe in the left. I came into the world and was like, oh, I didn't know there was this whole other ecosystem of media, and I didn't know all of these things. And she started sending me kind of reels, this mom, and it was like, oh, okay, red pill. And then it was like, it got crazy, and I had to have like an intervention with them. Basically, I was like, look, this person's, if you're not engaged in the culture wars, it can be pretty easy to say, hey, this person's popular, and therefore they're popular and rich, and therefore they're right. This is a dangerous thing to assume, in the same way that it's dangerous to assume that people who have degrees are right. It's also dangerous to assume that people who are popular and rich also are right about everything. And but people want to assume someone's right because they don't have a real system for analyzing. And who has the time? Who has the time to do this? So yeah, I mean, we can podcast about this, because I love talking about this stuff. I think about it all day long. I'm writing a book about this moment, this realignment. And I do think that there has been a death of expertise, which is good. This university exists as a reaction to what we were seeing in our other universities, which is captured by an ideology. But you guys are at least learning how to critically think. Not everybody is. They're just going from one place to another and reacting to it. And it's dangerous.
When did you feel comfortable talking about your recovery, or have you always felt comfortable doing that?
I've always been pretty open about that, because so many people, seeing that other people could do it and were successful and didn't have to stop living their life, and could still go to festivals. I mean, I've gone to 12-step meetings at Coachella. I've gone at Burning Man. You can still have a life and be sober. And I needed to see that and hear that. And I needed people to openly talk about, being in recovery. And it kind of inspired me to as well. And I'm just an open book. I've always been pretty open in general. So I understand why people wouldn't want to share that either. For me, it was the same reason that I've come out and talked about. I always say I have, that famous Jack Kerouac quote, I have nothing to offer the world but my confusion. And that really is where I stand. And getting sober truly was the hardest thing I ever did. And I overcame, if you knew my real, true whole story, getting sober was a very small fraction of some of the stuff I had to overcome. And it still is the best thing I've ever done. And I like to kind of be an example to people that you can still have fun and live your life. And it doesn't have to be over and sad and boring. Like, I live a very exciting, wild life still.
Thanks for being so open about your personal experience. You touched on your feelings of self-loathing and imposter syndrome from one college dropout to another. What advice do you have on overcoming that?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think that imposter syndrome is so sneaky. It's almost like depression. It lies to you in your own voice. It tells you don't belong. It tells you you'll never make it. It tells you you don't belong where you are. And it actually reveals a lack of faith and trust. Because who am I to question where I am? I mean, there was something, Rilke he has one of my favorite quotes that has saved me, which is that life is always right, good and bad. And life is always right has saved me. And it has also helped me get over a lot of imposter syndrome, because even if I feel like I don't belong, or this part of my brain is telling me that I shouldn't be there, who am I to judge that? That would be defying the creative force that's moving through me and has got me to exactly where I am in that moment. And for me to judge that is actually, it's spitting in the face of whatever you might believe is your creator, creative force, life force. It is truly spitting in the face of life. And so that's really been the most helpful thing for me, is that I don't get to decide that. I have imposter syndrome all the time. I also believe in putting yourself in uncomfortable positions over and over again, because those will teach you. I have a set tonight that I'm already telling myself I don't deserve already. And I have to get over it and say my job is to have fun and connect to the audience. And that's it. That's my only job. And stay in the lane of try and get out of that's it's like a negative vibe. It is, though. It's negative. It's something that's with meditation and getting, sometimes another thing that I do is just physical activity. If those voices get too loud and they're kind of, they can be very oppressive and suffocating. And I know I'll either write them out and let them have their say, just go for it, okay, and then crumple it up and be like, all right, thank you for your opinion. I treat it like a troll on the internet, or physically exert yourself. And that it is wild to me how quickly you can change your own mental state just by physically exerting yourself. Go for a hike, do some weights, bless you. Do, just a HIIT class, anything where you have to shift your mentality. I hope that helps. You can also just email me and call me if you really want.
Do you see comedy, like you mentioned connecting to the audience,
Mm-hmm.
like do you see comedy as a connection that's really like deep or even in a sense spiritual, like
Yeah,
much
I do.
higher than amusement?
I think amusement is important. We want to be like, hi. I sometimes will be like, that joke is my own joke is so silly or lame or something like that, or hack or simple. And again, some of them are, and they get huge laughs. And I'll be like, why does that simple joke get the biggest laugh? But sometimes it's those simple, obvious things. But yeah, the whole process feels like it's very interactive. It's why I took a break from comedy and got back, and I started over again, basically. And it's been very humbling starting as a beginner, essentially, when everyone I started with is headlining. And there's a part of me that's like, I could be here and I should be here, but life is always right. I'm exactly where I should be. But I do love, and I think podcasting helped me with this a lot. I used to be terrified of the audience. I would get on stage and just do my set. I wanted to just, it was about me. I wanted to say what I had to say and get off stage and make them laugh. And now it's much more like, I want to know what's going on in every one of your heads, because I know that you're interpreting me through your own filter and life experience. And I want to know what you do. And I want to know what's going on in your life right now and what you're thinking and why some things hit with an audience and another. I think there's all this talk about like, that's the language of the streets when there's like a riot or whatever. And I think laughter is the language of the streets too. I can tell a lot about where the culture is at from which jokes are hitting when, and when they stop hitting, why is that? It's usually because the vibe is shifting. So it's very interactive. It's very kinetic. It's very visceral, the whole process. Terrifying. There's adrenaline. It does feel, it feels very much like when I'm in that flow, and it's not always, but when I'm in it, it feels very much like being in the flow, the way an athlete would describe. You're just in the moment. You're present. I kind of have a rule: if I'm thinking, I should be talking. You're taking in so much up there. And if usually there's a thought, it's because this brain over here is picking something up that I should be just calling out. So yeah, I love it.
Well, I was going to ask, what's your favorite joke that you've come up with?
Oh, that's like picking a favorite child. And it changes. I get really sick of my material really fast. My challenge actually is to fall in love with my material and go deeper, because I tend to orphan a lot of my kids. Like I'll come up with a premise and I won't dig further enough into it, because I'll get bored with the material. And the truly great comedians make every set look like they're just coming up with it on the fly, because it's just in the moment. But I think, to answer your question right now, the favorite stuff I'm doing right now is about being a geriatric mommy, and just how, it's funny that that's even an actual medical term. Like, that's a medical term. And everyone's like, oh yeah, it's a geriatric pregnancy. And I'm like, this sounds like my uterus is moving to Florida to, go retire. And so there's a whole bit around that I love. But I'm also very connected to that moment in my life. And then one of the other jokes I love is a darker joke about my ex-husband, who, again, I'll get emotional. He did pass away too young. We were already divorced, but it's still tragic. We were always friends. But being that I'm a comedian and I use comedy to make fun of the darkness in my life, one of my jokes is about how I'm like, if you had told me that I was going to be a Texas suburban mom when I got sober, I never would have quit drinking. And I'm like, I would be dead of a fentanyl overdose now. That's how my ex-husband died. And people were like, and I'm like, don't feel bad. He would have loved that joke. It has fentanyl in it. And it's my way of processing something really traumatic and hard, and making light of something that still makes me cry randomly. So, but I do love that joke. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. All right. Thank you, guys. Keep going.